Hey guys! Welcome to my channel Time to Sleep. Have you ever wondered how one small decision can change an entire life? Tonight, I want to tell you the story of a boy who planted tree. So let's go. The Boy Who Planted Forever. Part 1, A Dream Hidden in the Valley. The evening sun slowly disappeared behind the rolling hills of northern Oregon, painting the sky with gentle shades of amber, lavender, and deep blue. A cool breeze drifted through the towering pine trees, carrying the comforting scent of fresh earth after a light spring rain. The quiet town of Ashwood had never been famous. It wasn't a place tourists searched for. There were no towering skyscrapers, crowded streets, or flashing lights. Instead, there were wooden homes, small farms, old country roads, a peaceful river that gently curved around the town. And beyond that river, a forgotten valley. Years ago, the valley had been covered by a magnificent forest. Old photographs hanging inside the town library showed enormous oak trees stretching toward the sky. Children once played beneath their branches. Birds filled the mornings with beautiful songs. Families gathered there every summer. But decades of careless logging, wildfires, and long droughts had changed everything. Now, the valley was almost empty. Dry grass covered the hills. Broken tree stumps stood like silent memories. Only the wind remained. The older residents often shook their heads whenever they looked toward it. "It's too late," they would quietly say. "No forest will ever grow there again." Only one boy refused to believe those words. His name was Ethan Brooks. He was 16 years old. Quiet. Curious. Thoughtful. While many teenagers dreamed about expensive cars or becoming famous athletes, Ethan loved something much simpler. Trees. Not because they were beautiful, but because they never rushed. They stood patiently through every season. They survived storms. They gave shade without asking for anything in return. And somehow, that inspired him. Every Saturday morning before sunrise, Ethan climbed the small hill behind his family's farmhouse. From there, he could see the entire valley below. Most people saw emptiness. Ethan imagined possibilities. He often carried an old notebook. Instead of writing songs or drawing superheroes, he sketched tiny forests, rows of oak trees, fields of wildflowers, walking trails, small wooden bridges crossing peaceful streams, birdhouses hanging from branches, places where families could someday picnic together. Whenever he finished another sketch, he smiled. To everyone else, it was only imagination. To Ethan, it was a plan. Life at home was simple. His father, Daniel Brooks, repaired farm equipment for nearby families. His hands were rough from years of honest work. His mother, Emily, taught science at the local elementary school. She believed every child could change the world, if someone simply believed in them first. Every evening, the Brooks family ate dinner together. No television. No phones. Just conversations. One evening, Daniel noticed another sketch lying beside Ethan's plate. It showed the empty valley covered by thousands of trees. His father studied it quietly. "You've drawn this valley many times." Ethan nodded. I think about it every day. Daniel smiled. It's beautiful. Then he asked softly. But why this valley? Ethan looked out the kitchen window toward the distant hills. Because everyone else has given up on it. Silence filled the room. His mother smiled gently. Sometimes the places people abandon need dreamers the most. Those words settled deep inside Ethan's heart. The following Monday, Ethan visited the Ashwood Public Library after school. Mrs. Margaret Wilson, the elderly librarian, greeted him with her usual warm smile. Looking for another nature book? Ethan laughed. You know me too well. She disappeared between the shelves before returning with several thick books about forests, ecosystems, soil restoration, and wildlife conservation. You've checked out nearly every book we own. I know. I'm not finished learning. Mrs. Wilson looked at him curiously. May I ask you something? Ethan nodded. What are you planning? He hesitated. It sounded impossible. Almost childish. Finally, he whispered. I want to bring the valley back. For a moment. Mrs. Wilson said nothing. Then she smiled. I hoped that was your answer. She reached beneath the counter and placed an old leather journal in front of him. This belonged to my grandfather. He was one of the first forest rangers in Oregon. The worn pages contained hand-drawn maps. Tree species. Planting methods. Notes about rainfall. Wildlife. And one sentence written carefully across the first page. A forest is never planted for today. It is planted for people you will never meet. Ethan read those words again. And again. Something changed inside him. As spring slowly became summer, Ethan spent every free afternoon exploring the forgotten valley. He measured the soil. Collected small samples. Observed where rainwater naturally flowed. Watched birds searching for places to nest. Sometimes he stayed until sunset. Sometimes until the stars appeared overhead. The valley never frightened him. Instead, it felt peaceful. Almost as though it had been waiting for someone to return. One evening, while sitting on a large weathered rock, Ethan quietly said aloud. I don't know how long this will take. Maybe 10 years. Maybe 20. But one day, there will be trees here again. Only the gentle wind answered. Yet somehow, that was enough. When the new school year began, Ethan shared his dream during science class. Most students listened politely. A few smiled. Others laughed. One boy raised his hand. You really think one person can rebuild an entire forest? The classroom became quiet. Ethan thought carefully before answering. No. One person can't. But one person can plant the first tree. His teacher smiled proudly. She knew something important had happened. Not because Ethan had the perfect answer. But because he truly believed it. That evening, Ethan walked back to the valley one more time. The sun dipped below the horizon. Thousands of stars slowly appeared above the peaceful hills. He reached into his backpack and removed a tiny oak sapling. Barely 12 inches tall. Its roots wrapped carefully inside moist cloth. He gently knelt beside the earth. Dug a small hole with his hands. placed the young tree inside, covered its roots with fresh soil, then poured a bottle of water around its base. He stood quietly, looking at the tiny sapling. It seemed almost impossible that something so small could ever change an entire valley. But Ethan smiled. Every great forest had once begun with a single tree. And every extraordinary journey had once begun with a single step. Tonight, the valley was no longer forgotten, because someone had finally planted hope. Part 2, The First Seeds of Hope. Morning arrived gently over the little town of Ashwood. Golden sunlight slipped through the pine trees, and a light mist floated above the quiet river. Birds welcomed the new day with cheerful songs, while the cool breeze carried the fresh scent of cedar and damp earth. For most people, it was simply another ordinary Tuesday. For Ethan Brooks, it was the first morning of a promise he intended to keep. Before school, he walked nearly 2 miles to the forgotten valley carrying a small watering can and a backpack. The tiny oak sapling he had planted the evening before stood quietly beneath the morning sun. Its leaves were still bright green. Its fragile stem bent slightly with the breeze. Ethan knelt beside it and smiled. "Good morning," he whispered. He poured fresh water around its roots, then carefully removed several small weeds growing nearby. No one watched him. No cameras. No applause. Only silence. Yet somehow, it felt like the beginning of something important. School passed slowly that day. While his classmates talked about football games, weekend plans, and social media, Ethan's thoughts remained inside the valley. During lunch, his best friend, Noah Carter, noticed Ethan sketching another map. "You've been drawing that place for months." Ethan smiled. "I know. You really believe you can rebuild it?" "I do." Noah looked toward the window. "The whole valley?" "Not today. Not this year. But someday." Noah laughed softly. "You always think 20 years ahead." Ethan shrugged. "Trees do." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally Noah smiled. "If you're planting more this weekend, I'll help." It wasn't a large promise. Just 2 simple words. "I'll help." But to Ethan, it felt enormous. Every forest began with one tree. Perhaps every movement began with one friend. Saturday arrived beneath clear blue skies. Just after sunrise, Noah rode his bicycle to the Brooks family farmhouse. Behind him, tied carefully to the bike rack, were 6 tiny maple saplings from his grandfather's nursery. Ethan couldn't believe his eyes. "You brought trees?" Noah grinned. "My grandfather said they were too small to sell. But maybe they're perfect for your valley." The 2 friends loaded the saplings into an old wooden wagon. Daniel Brooks smiled as they prepared to leave. "Need another pair of hands?" The boys looked surprised. "You'll come?" Daniel nodded. "I've planted enough fence posts in my life. Maybe it's time I planted a few trees." 3 people. 7 tiny saplings. 1 forgotten valley. Sometimes history begins with very ordinary mornings. The work was harder than Ethan had imagined. The soil was dry. Large stones hid beneath the surface. Some holes took nearly 20 minutes to dig. Sweat rolled down their faces beneath the warm spring sun. By afternoon, only 7 trees stood quietly across the wide valley. Anyone driving past would barely notice them. Noah looked around and sighed. We've worked all day. And it still looks empty. Ethan wiped dirt from his hands. It does. But forests don't grow in one afternoon. They grow one tree at a time. Daniel smiled proudly. That's exactly how families, and businesses, and communities grow too. Over the following weeks, planting became a weekend tradition. Sometimes Ethan worked alone. Sometimes Noah joined him. Occasionally his father came along. His mother often packed sandwiches, fresh fruit, and homemade lemonade for everyone. The valley slowly began changing. Not dramatically. Not enough for most people to notice. But enough for Ethan. Small patches of green appeared where dry soil had once dominated. Wildflowers returned after several spring rains. Butterflies fluttered between the young saplings. Nature was quietly responding. One afternoon, an elderly man stopped his pickup truck beside the valley. His name was Mr. Harold Jenkins. Everyone in Ashwood knew him. He had lived there for nearly 70 years. He watched Ethan digging another hole. You know those trees probably won't survive. Ethan stood respectfully. Some won't. Mr. Jenkins nodded. The drought will kill many. Probably. The deer will eat others. They might. So why keep planting? Ethan smiled gently. Because the ones that survive will make planting the next ones easier. The old man studied him for several moments. Without another word, he walked back to his truck. Opened the tailgate. Inside were 12 young pine saplings. I wasn't planning on giving these away. He paused. But I think I found someone who needs them. Ethan's eyes widened. Thank you. Mr. Jenkins simply tipped his hat. No. Thank you. News traveled surprisingly fast inside a small town. Within a few weeks, more people began noticing the young man planting trees every weekend. Some admired him. Some questioned him. Others quietly laughed. At the local diner one evening, Ethan overheard several conversations. That boy's wasting his time. The valley's finished. He should focus on college. He'll grow out of it. Ethan continued eating quietly. He didn't argue. Dreams rarely need louder voices. They need stronger roots. Late that summer, something unexpected happened. After a gentle rainfall, Ethan noticed several tiny oak seedlings growing naturally near the first tree he had planted. The tree had already begun attracting birds. The birds carried seeds. The seeds became new life. Nature was beginning to help. Ethan smiled wider than ever before. The valley wasn't waiting anymore. It was waking up. That evening, sitting beneath the stars with his notebook resting on his knees, Ethan carefully wrote. Today I learned something beautiful. When you care for nature, nature begins caring for itself. He closed the notebook. The wind whispered softly through the tiny leaves of the young trees. Only months earlier, the valley had stood completely silent. Now, it carried the gentle sounds of life returning. Not because someone had performed a miracle, but because someone had refused to believe that hope could never grow again. And far beyond the quiet hills surrounding Ashwood, a much greater challenge was slowly approaching. One that would test Ethan's courage far more than hard soil or long days of planting ever could. Because planting trees would prove easier than convincing people to protect them. Part 3, when the valley was in danger. Autumn arrived quietly in Ashwood. The mornings became cooler. Golden leaves drifted gently from the maple trees, covering the sidewalks like a colorful blanket. The river reflected the bright orange hills, and every sunset seemed to last a little longer than the one before. For Ethan Brooks, autumn had always been his favorite season. The young trees he had planted only months earlier were beginning to grow stronger. Their roots had reached deeper into the earth. Tiny birds now rested on their branches. Wildflowers had spread farther across the valley than he had ever imagined. It wasn't yet a forest, but it was no longer empty. Nature was slowly returning. Every Saturday morning followed the same peaceful rhythm. Before sunrise, Ethan packed his backpack. A water bottle, his notebook, a small shovel, garden gloves, a simple lunch prepared by his mother, and 1 or 2 new saplings donated by kind neighbors who had quietly begun supporting his dream. He no longer planted trees alone. Sometimes Noah joined him. Sometimes Mr. Jenkins arrived with his old pickup truck carrying young pine trees. Occasionally, a few local children came to help water the saplings. Without anyone realizing it, hope was spreading through the town. One tree at a time. Late one afternoon, Ethan noticed several unfamiliar vehicles parked near the entrance to the valley. Large white trucks. Construction equipment. Men wearing bright orange safety vests. One of them carried rolled-up blueprints. Another placed small red flags into the ground. Curious, Ethan walked toward them. A tall man wearing a company jacket smiled politely. "Hello there. Can I help you?" Ethan looked around. "What are you doing?" The man unfolded a map. "We're surveying the land." "For what?" "A new housing development." The words felt heavier than Ethan expected. "Housing development." The man nodded. "The town is growing. This valley is the perfect location. Hundreds of new homes. Shopping areas. Parking lots. New roads." Ethan slowly looked across the valley. Toward every young tree. Toward every small patch of green that had begun returning. Suddenly, he could imagine bulldozers where birds now rested. Concrete where wildflowers bloomed. Silence replaced by heavy machines. His heart sank. That evening, the Ashwood Town Council held a public meeting. The community hall quickly filled with residents. Some welcomed the idea. Others looked uncertain. The development company presented beautiful computer images. Modern neighborhoods. Wide roads. Large playgrounds. Coffee shops. The audience applauded. Everything looked impressive. Then one presenter smiled confidently. This unused valley has provided very little value for many years. Ethan lowered his eyes. Unused. He quietly thought about the hundreds of hours spent planting. The birds returning. The butterflies. The children helping every weekend. To him, the valley had never been empty. When the meeting opened for public comments, the room became silent. No one stood. Then, Ethan slowly raised his hand. The mayor smiled kindly. Go ahead, Ethan. His hands trembled slightly as he walked toward the microphone. He wasn't used to speaking in front of large crowds. Taking one deep breath, he began. When people look at the valley, they see empty land. I see something different. I see the future. The room listened quietly. I planted the first tree there 6 months ago. Since then, birds have returned. Wildflowers have returned. Children have started helping. If nature can heal itself, shouldn't we give it the chance? Someone near the back quietly whispered. He's just a kid. Ethan heard it, but continued anyway. I know houses are important. I know our town needs to grow. But maybe we don't have to replace nature. Maybe we can grow alongside it. For several moments, no one spoke. The mayor thanked him. The meeting continued. No decision was made that evening. The following morning, local newspapers reported on the meeting. One small article caught everyone's attention. Teenager asks town to protect forgotten valley. The story spread faster than anyone expected. Teachers discussed it in classrooms. Families talked about it during dinner. Even neighboring towns began hearing about Ashwood's forgotten valley. Some people supported Ethan. Others believed development should continue. For the first time, the entire community was having an important conversation. A few days later, Mrs. Margaret Wilson from the library called Ethan. I think you should come here. When Ethan arrived, he found several old photo albums waiting on the table. Mrs. Wilson smiled. I found these in our archives. The photographs showed the valley nearly 80 years earlier. Massive oak forests. Crystal clear streams. Children fishing. Families camping beneath giant trees. One photograph showed Ethan's own grandfather as a little boy standing beside an enormous oak tree. Ethan stared quietly. I never knew. Mrs. Wilson nodded. Most people forgot. But history has a way of reminding us what matters. She carefully handed him copies of every photograph. I think the town should see these. The next weekend, Ethan organized something simple. He invited anyone interested to join him for a peaceful walk through the valley. He expected perhaps 5 people. Instead, nearly 50 arrived. Families, teachers, students, retired couples, photographers. Even the mayor quietly joined the group. As everyone walked together, they noticed things many had never seen before. Young oak trees reaching toward the sky. Butterflies dancing among wildflowers. Bird nests hidden inside fresh branches. Small streams flowing again after months of restoration. Children smiled. Parents took photographs. The valley suddenly looked very different. Not abandoned. Alive. As the sun slowly set beyond the hills, everyone gathered beneath the very first oak tree Ethan had planted. It had already grown taller than his shoulder. The mayor stood quietly beside it. He gently touched one of its green leaves. Then looked toward Ethan. "You planted this?" Ethan nodded. "Yes." The mayor smiled. "Perhaps. This valley deserves more time." Those words spread through the crowd like a warm breeze. No decision had been made. Nothing was guaranteed. But for the very first time, people had stopped seeing an empty valley. They had begun seeing possibility. And sometimes, that is where every great change begins. That night, Ethan returned home beneath a sky filled with brilliant stars. He opened his notebook beside his bedroom window. Carefully, he wrote, "Dreams don't grow because everyone believes in them. They grow because someone believes long enough for others to finally see them too." He closed the notebook. Outside, the wind gently rustled the leaves of the young trees in the valley. They were still small. Still fragile. But no longer invisible. Somewhere beyond the peaceful hills, a decision was approaching. One that could change the future of the valley forever. Would the town choose quick progress? Or lasting hope? Only time would tell. Part 4, The 1,000,000 Trees Project. A peaceful winter settled over Ashwood. The mountains wore a light blanket of snow, and each morning the valley shimmered beneath a layer of silver frost. The young trees stood quietly against the cold wind, their tiny branches swaying gently beneath pale blue skies. Most people believed winter was a season of waiting. But Ethan Brooks had learned something different. Winter was the season of preparation. While the trees rested, dreams continued to grow. Every morning before school, Ethan still walked to the valley. He checked each sapling carefully. Some had lost their leaves. Others bent beneath the weight of frost. A few had not survived the harsh weather. Whenever Ethan found one that had died, he never became discouraged. He gently removed it, prepared the soil again, and quietly planted another. His father once asked, "Doesn't it hurt to lose them?" Ethan smiled softly. "It does. But forests aren't built by counting the trees that die. They're built by planting the next one." Daniel placed a warm hand on his son's shoulder. "You've learned something most adults never do." As Christmas approached, Ashwood held its annual winter festival. Families gathered in the town square. Children laughed as snowflakes drifted through the evening air. Local musicians played gentle holiday songs beneath glowing lights. Near the center of the square stood a large community Christmas tree. This year, something new had been added beside it. A small wooden booth. Above it hung a handmade sign. "Plant a tree. Plant hope." It was Ethan's idea. Visitors could donate a few dollars to purchase tree saplings for the valley. No one expected much. Perhaps enough for 20 or 30 trees. The festival opened at noon. By sunset, the donation box was overflowing. Little children dropped in their allowance. Grandparents quietly contributed larger amounts. One local bakery donated an entire day's profit. A retired couple paid for 100 saplings. A farmer promised free compost every spring. By the end of the weekend, enough money had been collected for more than 2,000 young trees. Ethan could hardly believe it. The valley was no longer just his dream. It had become the town's dream. A few weeks later, Mrs. Margaret Wilson from the library had another idea. People need to see your progress. Together, they created a simple website. No advertisements. No fancy design. Only photographs. Every week Ethan uploaded pictures of the growing valley. Small videos of birds returning. Wildflowers blooming. Children planting trees. Families working together. At the bottom of every page appeared one simple sentence. One tree today. A forest tomorrow. Neither of them expected many visitors. But slowly, people began sharing the website. First nearby towns. Then neighboring states. Within a few months, thousands of people had viewed the story. Messages arrived from across America. Keep going. Your work inspired my family to plant trees. We started our own community garden because of you. Thank you for reminding us that small actions matter. Ethan read every message carefully. Each one gave him new strength. Spring returned once again. The valley looked different now. The first oak tree stood taller than Ethan. Dozens of maple trees stretched toward the bright blue sky. Wildflowers covered the hillsides with purple, yellow, and white blossoms. Butterflies danced in the sunlight. Rabbits had returned. Fox tracks appeared after fresh rain. And every morning, the songs of birds grew louder. Nature was writing its own thank you letter. One Saturday, while volunteers planted another row of trees, Noah looked across the valley in amazement. Do you remember the first day? Ethan smiled. 7 trees. And now? Ethan slowly turned. Thousands. Everywhere he looked, small forests had begun to connect. The empty valley no longer existed. Instead, a young woodland was quietly taking shape. Noah laughed. I think you've officially become the town's craziest success story. Both friends laughed together. That afternoon, the mayor arrived carrying a rolled-up document. He gathered everyone beneath the largest oak tree. I have an announcement. The volunteers became quiet. The town council voted unanimously last night. A long pause followed. Then he smiled. The valley will officially become a protected public nature reserve. Applause echoed across the hills. Some people wiped away tears. Mr. Jenkins quietly removed his old hat. Mrs. Wilson smiled proudly. Daniel placed his arm around his son. For Ethan, the moment felt almost unreal. Only 1 year earlier, everyone had called the valley hopeless. Now, the town had promised to protect it forever. But the mayor wasn't finished. We've also decided something else. He handed Ethan a folded map. At the top were 4 simple words. The 1 Million Trees Project. Ethan looked confused. The mayor explained. We don't want to stop with one valley. We want to inspire communities across America. Our goal 1,000,000 trees. Silence filled the air. 1,000,000. The number seemed impossible. Ethan slowly looked across the young forest. He remembered planting the very first tiny oak tree alone beneath the stars. Back then, even 7 trees had seemed difficult. Now someone was asking him to dream of 1,000,000. He smiled. Perhaps impossible dreams simply become larger over time. That evening, as the golden sunset painted the valley in warm shades of orange and pink, Ethan opened his notebook. Carefully he wrote, "People once laughed because I planted 1 tree. Today they believe we can plant 1,000,000. Dreams don't become real because they grow smaller. They become real because people grow brave enough to believe in them." He closed the notebook. A gentle breeze rustled through thousands of young leaves. The sound was soft, peaceful, almost like applause from the forest itself. Far beyond Ashwood, people across the country had begun hearing about a quiet young man who believed 1 tree could change the future. Soon, they would want to meet him. And Ethan's peaceful little valley would become the beginning of something far greater than anyone had ever imagined.